In England, Black History Month has been celebrated in the month of October since 1987. The introduction of Black History Month was facilitated by the former Greater London Council, which selected the month of October as it coincided with the Marcus Garvey celebrations and London Jubilee. Being a British dependent territory, it is only fit that the British Virgin Islands recognize its rich history of deserving Virgin Islanders whose courage, challenge, and determination for change has paved the way of life we enjoy today. Although this encyclopedia is nowhere complete, it provides a fascinating memorial of the trailblazers and pioneers who left deep footprints on the sand of time. A good glimpse into times past and reminders of whence we came, the history, culture, and development of our British Virgin Islands. It captures some of the legendary men and women who are most often underappreciated by their own generation, that is left to succeeding generations to evaluate and fully appreciate their true worth to society. Young people will never know who some of these people are and what they did for the territory. So it's important that we document and recognize the icons of the past that have paved the way for the economic and social life we enjoy today.
Cyril B. Romney, commonly known as CB, was the first local appointee to hold the position of Financial Secretary within the territory, a post he held for 4.5 years. In 1979, he became the elected representative of the 5th District, and in his second term in 1983, he was named the 3rd Chief Minister of the territory. Mr. Romney had a passion for the development of tourism infrastructure, which led to successful business ventures such as Travel Plan Travel Agency in 1969, rentals and taxi service with safari vehicles in 1979. Being an active member of the BVI Tourism Board, he saw the importance of cruise tourism in promoting the BVI. Although there was reluctance in the community and government to support cruise tourism, during his tenure as Chief Minister, CB saw to it that a cruise pier was built on Tortola, which has since been expanded. Other major contributions during his terms of political service include the introduction of the International Business Companies Act and negotiating the return of Wickham's Quay and Anegada to the public domain, among many other contributions.
Ethelyn Smith, also known as Goddy, was the 5th of 9 children that matured to be a woman of verse. Miss Smith served as a civil servant for 32 years and rose through the ranks, making history when she became the first woman to be appointed to the position of Accountant General back in 1970, and then in 1995, when she entered the realm of politics, she became one of the first 2 women to be elected to political office, along with Mrs. Eileen Parsons. Miss Smith was a minister as well, which was unthinkable before the 1900s, as she held the title of Minister of Health and Welfare during her tenure. As the Minister for Health and Welfare, not only did she make it clear for the commencement of works for the establishment of the new hospital, but for her notable achievements for securing land at Foy Hill, where the Watch House is located, and instituting the territory's first Medical and Dental Council. Ethelyn Smith, the BVI's first lady in her own way.
Paul P. Watley was a pioneer in both his personal and professional life. He was an avid photographer who founded Paul's Photo Studio. It is believed that he was the first BVI lander to develop his own film. After receiving his architectural diploma from the Institute of Design and Construction of Brooklyn, New York, in 1969, Watley returned home and he became one of the first local architects in the territory. Watley gave several aspiring architects like Romney Penn, Courtney DeCastro, and Cromwell Smith their first apprenticeships and drafting jobs. Always innovative, in 1974 he opened and operated Modular Homes Limited, where he built homes using new precast concrete methods, which are now a common building method in the territory. His last architectural designs before his passing were the renovated St. George's Episcopal Church and its kindergarten block. In 2003, Paul Watley was appointed the Minister of Communications and Works and was known as a stickler for details and at times viewed as a hardliner in standing up for his convictions. Under his leadership, the BVI saw major developments, including the start of the Russell Hill Road and improvements in the aesthetics of the capital.
H. Lavity Stout was the first and most influential chief minister in the history of the British Virgin Islands. He was the longest-serving chief minister at the time of his death, winning 5 general elections in 1967, 1979, 1986, 1990, and 1995, and served 38 consecutive years after his first election to the Legislative Council in 1957. Honorable Lavity Stout was the model of the self-made island man, notably successful in the public life of his island home. He topped the electoral poll for the 1st district in 11 consecutive general elections. He was never defeated, and this ranked him as the longest continuous serving head of government parliamentarian in the Caribbean. Mr. Stout left school early and studied house and boat building before he made his way in and around building construction, landscaping, and retail business. Although his lack of formal education must at times have been a handicap to him, or because of it, H. Lavity Stout long recognized the need to improve the quality and range of education for all in the British Virgin Islands and to provide government-financed opportunities for bright, talented young people. He was passionately committed to the development of the territory's development as a financial center. He spearheaded the development of the BVI Community College, which was later renamed in his honor as the H. Lavity Stout Community College in 1993, and provided extensive support for scholarship and training programs abroad that BVI landers have cause to be grateful for. The Central Administration Building in Road Town, built on reclaimed land, besides the sparkling waters of Road Harbor, is evidence of another landmark piloted by Honorable Stout. During his 38 years of ministerial government, Stout, through his leadership, direction, and determination was a driving force behind the positive action movement as regards the Wickham's Quay property. He gained the support of the British government in that Bates, the lessee of the Wickham's Quay property, be reimbursed so that the land could be returned to the people of the Virgin Islands. He saw to other major changes such as the Peebles Hospital expansion, clinics in all districts, the removal of primary schools from church buildings, electricity and water development, improvement and expansion of roads, ports development at the major entry points, the establishment of a fire department in Road Town with small units in other areas, tourism development with offices in the United States, London, and Europe, and the introduction of a social security scheme, just to name a few.
Nurse Iris Eunice O'Neill hails from Hunter's Gut, Tortola, but relocated to the Valley Virgin Gorda when she married Alan O'Neill. Her nursing career started in 1939 at the then Cottage Hospital, now Peebles Hospital, training junior nurses and acting as charge nurse on various occasions. In 1943, she was appointed district nurse on Virgin Gorda and also served in Anegada. She was loved by the district as she gave service above self and never said no to any proposal that was for the improvement of the community. Several honors were conferred upon Nurse O'Neill. She was awarded the British Empire Medal in 1968. The Lions Club named her Citizen of the Year in 1977, and the Valley Clinic in Virgin Gorda was renamed in her honor in 1977.
Kenneth Chalwell, a descendant of seafaring captains, was himself a sea captain as well as a freight and real estate entrepreneur. From an early age, he was fascinated with the sea, accompanying his father on monthly voyages in transporting prisoners, mentally ill patients, students, and mail across the Caribbean. Consequently, he became a master of the sea and commander of all his vessels. Captain Kenneth Chalwell was a brave and sturdy sailor and businessman with total commitment to the British Virgin Islands. In his work, he transported people, boats, mail, supplies, and goods throughout the Caribbean, US mainland, and the BVI. From his first vessel, the Lower Light, which was no bigger than a dinghy, he began a regular freight service for his first customer, Bobby Leonard, the founder of Bobby's Marketplace. By 1977, his business expanded with the purchase of a second vessel, the Yankee Girl, which allowed him to transport fresh produce for Road Town Wholesale every Wednesday. With the growth of the freight services, bigger vessels such as the Midnight Star and Sky Seal were later acquired to keep up with business demands. For more than 35 years, Bobby's and Road Town Wholesale are still being serviced today by his sons on these very same vessels. His contribution to the areas of goods transportation to this country and individual citizens is indelible.
Isaac Glanville Fonseca was an articulate and able speaker who emerged as the chief spokesperson of the Leadership Coalition during the prelude to the famous 1949 demonstration that brought back constitutional change in the form of the restoration of local representation, with a subsequent election which followed in 1950. He was one of the first elected representatives to the then Legislative Council in 1950, now called the House of Assembly. He served 5 consecutive terms. A total of 21 years were spent in service to the people of the territory. Glanny, as he was affectionately called, became the first leader of the opposition in 1967 under the People's Own Party, which had a glorious phrase, "Pop on top."
Hubert Robinson O'Neill, also known as Robbie, was a businessman, seaman, and a legislator with an enormous charisma and generous personality. From building his first sailing sloop to a long succession of cargo vessels like the Anegada, the Tortola, and the Virgin Gorda, which were built with timbers from the mountains of Gorda Peak on Virgin Gorda in the 1940s, he operated a freight service between the islands of the US and British Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, and the Caribbean, from the Dominican Republic as far south as Trinidad. Robinson O'Neill Enterprises became the shipping lifeline for the people of the Virgin Islands from the 1940s for the better part of 3 decades. He was the man that the families on Virgin Gorda gave their shopping list to, and he would return 1 week later with their goods from his journey to the Big Islands, which he often did those favors without compensation, knowing the families were farmers with very meager means. Robbie was the first to introduce motor vehicles to Virgin Gorda, even at a time when there were only dirt tracks. He brought some of the first heavy equipment, dump trucks, and payloaders to assist contractors in the early days when building was mostly done manually. He was an elected member for Virgin Gorda from 1967 to 1971, and although he only served 1 term, he was instrumental in bridging the gap between North Sound and the Valley by helping to push through the connecting road, and on occasions even used his own money and equipment to see the project through. Mr. O'Neill sought to improve the standard of education on the island. He was successful in having the government build a primary school at North Sound, and it was through a public service act of transporting the furniture for the said school in his own truck that he met his untimely death in an automobile accident. The Robinson O'Neill Memorial School was named in his memory, and this was the first public building in the territory to bear the name of a native British Virgin Islander.
Terence Lettsome, born in Long Look, worked as a fisherman, farmer, contractor, and entrepreneur locally and overseas before entering politics in 1963. Also referred to as TB, in 1967, he was appointed the first Minister of Communication and Works and Utilities. After 36 years of committed, dedicated service to the 7th District, he retired from the political arena in 1999. He was one of the few legislators who served consecutive terms since the inception of the ministerial system. As a tribute to his outstanding record of service, in February of 2001, the Legislative Council voted to rename the Beef Island Airport in Lettsome's honor as the Terence B. Lettsome International Airport.
Howard Reynold Penn, OBE, was born on the 11th of November 1903. H.R. Penn became a household name by his rise from a shoe repairman and shop helper to a leading businessman. In 1950, H.R. Penn was elected a member of the first Legislative Council, and during his 13-year political career, he played a key role with the late H.L. Stout and Luther Scatliff in making Joe's Hill Road motorable from the once known foot trail. Born in Road Town on the 14th of July, 1890, Sir James Oliver Georges served his country well as a businessman, sportsman, and politician. Her Majesty the Queen recognized the vast contributions Mr. Georges made to the community by conferring upon him the MBE and OBE awards. In 1971, he was given the honor of Knight Bachelor, and he remains the only British Virgin Islander to be knighted. Sir Oliver Georges Plaza sees his name live on in the center of Road Town.
Noah Lloyd was an extremely skillful carpenter, a mechanical engineer, a businessman, and an exemplary and patriotic man from the British Virgin Islands. Noah Lloyd owned 2 shops in Road Town and dreamed of opening a technical school on the island to share his skills gained from the Canadian Air Force and the Royal Air Force, in addition to his hopes of a political career. Like so many black people in the 1960s, Noel was inspired yet angry by the frustration and promise he had experienced in the United States of America, Britain, and Africa. So much so that when the late Walter Lindy DeCastro came to him and explained the full impact that the Bates Hill development would have on their island, he knew that he was not going to allow Tortola to be invaded and allow expatriates to take away the greater wealth and opportunity promised for his island that he looked forward to. Lloyd immediately began to spread the word around Road Town of the changes that would befall Tortola and Anegada if the developments went ahead. Lindy DeCastro and Noah Lloyd made clear to residents that Tortolians would have no share in the future prosperity if the Bates Hill development went forward. The plan showed that for 199 years, all roads to Wickham's Quay would be blocked off as private land and native islanders would be locked out, while on Anegada, 90% of the Bates Hill airstrip was going to be built on family-owned land and become private land. The projects commenced and tensions increased on Tortola. But after the assassination of the late Martin Luther King on the 4th of April 1968, Noel immediately saw the parallel between the civil rights movement and the plight of native BV Islanders. He realized that the time had come for direct action to safeguard the islands. Noel's first act of protest was a mild one. On the 6th of April, he marched alone around Road Town carrying placards calling for positive action and calling the people to a meeting on the 8th of April. His first lonely walk was a success, but on the 9th of April 1968, he took positive action and he moved with his flag, and as he moved, the people followed, which resulted in grievances about the Bates Hill development being heard by the island administrator. Noah Lloyd and Lindy DeCastro led the fight through this march, championing this just cause, and as a consequence of the group's protests, brought the project to a halt, and the British government eventually bought back the BVI lands that we now know as Anegada and Wickham's Quay 1 and 2. In later years, Noel continued to be fearless in his fight for his people, so much so that he was often abused by the government and endured much physical abuse by the police in speaking out for the people. Noah Lloyd was arrested and detained in prison after he invaded the police station unarmed with a handful of men in an attempt to arrest the police for not doing their duty to protect the people. Lloyd found the whole force either asleep or off duty, which proved then that they were not being adequately protected by the police. He became under severe mental strain from all the injustices. He escaped from prison and took refuge to the bush until his recapture. However, on his recapture, the people took Lloyd away from the police and carried him to the hospital. The people insisted that he be taken to Jamaica for treatment, and the will of the people prevailed. This time it was the people who took positive action in defense of a good man, the humanitarian Noah Lloyd, a champion BVI lander.
Leslie Malone, a pioneer and real Virgin Islands patriot who impacted our islands educationally, socially, culturally, and politically. His native intelligence, astuteness as a politician, and fearlessness brought several successful initiatives that laid the foundation for the Virgin Islands of the 70s and 80s. Among his initiatives, he was the founding pioneer of students commuting to school, which now has a multiplying effect in commuting students throughout the territory. When students from East and Long Look could not attend the then secondary school in Road Town, unless they rode a horse or donkey, it was Leslie who sacrificed and purchased a car to commute students. Year after year, the number of students grew that by 1961, he was the first person to own a school bus to transport children to school throughout the territory. Those early commuting students, such as Mrs. Elvira Potter Blyden, Dr. Quincy Lettsam, Mrs. Medita Wheatley, Dr. Joel Stevens, Dr. Dante Davis, Mr. Betito Fret, Dr. the Honorable Kedrick Pickering, Mrs. Dancer Pensala, and many more, are now making significant contributions to the Virgin Islands and other parts of the world. He had the foresight in steering the location of the airport towards its current site at Beef Island, and through government, he was able to acquire land for the first phase of the Beef Island Airport, which has now expanded to the Terence B. Lettsam International Airport. On his visit to the Foreign and Commonwealth Office in London, he was the one who was courageous to show that the British Virgin Islands and the US Virgin Islands are sister islands, and there must be an internal link with the two sets of islands, and have the US dollar as a legal tender. The US dollar became the legal tender officially in the Virgin Islands in 1959. Another landmark decision, championed by Honorable Malone, was for the East End Long Look Festival to become an official part of the Emancipation celebration. Although one might recall that the first East End Long Look Festival started unofficially on August Wednesday in 1955 and continued through to 1956. The festival took place, but it was not an official holiday. The Honorable Leslie Malone argued vigorously for August Wednesday to be declared an official holiday so that the festival could take place in a proper setting. He explained that Road Town and Seacows Bay had their day, and that the East End Long Look area, being the second largest area in the British Virgin Islands, should have their day as well. He tabled the motion to the Legislative Council, and in 1957, August Wednesday became an official holiday. During 1957 to 1958, as a legislator, the Honorable Leslie Malone scrutinized overseas investors' pursuit to purchase the McNamara estate. In order to prevent this, through council, he divided the area into plots to be purchased by Virgin Islanders, and immediately extended the boundary of Road Town to include McNamara. Many Virgin Islanders wanted to sell their land as the money looked good in those days, but he was against natives selling their land. He believed that privately owned land should not be sold wholesale to outside interests. There was no resident attorney general in those days, and he journeyed to Antigua to get an attorney general to draft a law which prohibited the sale of land. His actions gave birth to the Aliens Landholding Regulation Act of 1960, which remains today. When the famous USA developer, the late Lawrence Rockefeller, was turned down to develop Beef Island and decided to take his resort ideas to St. Martin, it was Leslie Malone's heroic and valiant efforts that took Mr. Rockefeller to the shores of Virgin Gorda to ensure that he invested in our islands. As a result, the Little Dix Bay Hotel was built on Virgin Gorda and opened in 1964. He was a no-nonsense man who lived by the precept that you don't play and fight at the same time. He allowed no one to define him, whether they had a justification to or not. So much so that in 1993, when he was awarded the British Empire Medal, he refused it because he did not feel it was commensurate with the kind of service he had given to the Virgin Islands. He believed that he rated at least an MBE for his courageous leadership, which his life's accomplishments are true testaments to his beliefs.
Walter DeCastro, the first black person to graduate from the School of Engineering from New York University before the Civil Rights Movement, had achieved a great measure of success before being a stalwart to the territory as the whistleblower of the activist group that saved the BVI from economic re-enslavement in the late 1960s. Everyone called him Rasahuru or Lindy, and being the chief surveyor of the territory, he reviewed the plans to the Baith Hill development in 1969. Lindy recognized the full impact the Baith Hill development lease would have on the islands of Anegada and Tortola, and by way of this lease, for 199 years, the people of the BVI would have no share in the future prosperity. All roads to Wickham's Key would be blocked off as private land, and BVI landers would be locked out while 40,000 foreign workers and business people streamed in. Of Anegada's 9,696 acres, 8,196 acres were leased, leaving less than 10% of Anegada to its own people. Lindy was not going to sit by and let this happen, so he turned to his friend, the late Noah Lloyd, who was very popular in his era, to help spread the word around of the changes that would befall Tortola and Anegada if developments went ahead. Lindy, alongside Noah Lloyd, were the leaders of the movement for liberation of his people as a founding member and spokesperson of the Positive Action Movement that orchestrated the powerful protest march of 1968 down the streets of Road Town that saved Anegada and Wickham's Key for the indigenous native Virgin Islanders. Lindy can also be remembered for the mass rally he led in 1973 at the old recreation ground, where the BVI called for the resignation of Governor Cudmore for commuting a convict's death sentence. This demonstration was supported by the Legislative Council, which raised a resolution demanding his removal and for changes to the 1967 Constitution. Lindy was an individual who not only talked the talk, but more important, walked the walk, to help raise the awareness and consciousness of a black man's role in the universe to stand up for social and political injustices. His devotion to his people and their welfare landed him in jail, where he occupied cell number 5, which was later the inspiration for the name later given to the bar and restaurant he originally operated. Ironically, after being ill, Lindy's last desire was to return home to Tortola in time for August Monday. Although he did not live to see this, his body was called to rest on the eve of the annual Emancipation celebration in 1999, for if his life meant anything at all, it reflects liberation.
Clement Turnbull, better known as Tommy, wore many hats as he was a jack of all trades. After migrating to New York to improve his life and skill set, he returned home to the BVI and left an indelible mark in the construction field before his passing. Tommy was the first to introduce many innovative construction ideas to the BVI, such as sheetrocking, drop ceiling, hardwood flooring, and acrocrete finishes, which are commonly used today.
Theodulf Faulkner, a man of indomitable spirit, a giant, a man who dared to dream of a better way of life for the Virgin Islands and its people, engaged all of his energy in doing just that. This simple fisherman from Anegada perceived the need for self-government to create a government of the people. He strongly believed that we, the people of the territory, should decide our own local affairs with our own selves, decide how our money is spent, and what shall be our presidential laws and policies. His oratory struck a chord, and his activism and vision aided and abetted the able support of his colleagues, the late Isaac Fonseca and Carlton de Castro, to start a movement. They were a united three. His courage, determination, and sense of humor won the respect of the people. A throng of over 1,500 BV Islanders from near and far stood behind him on that memorable morning on 24th November 1949, when they marched from the old recreation grounds to Main Street to the Commissioner's office and presented a petition with their grievances against the political system and the manner in which the presidency was being administered. This huge march is of great significance in the history of our islands. It proved to be the catalyst which set in train a series of constitutional, political, economical, and social development, which still has impact on the British Virgin Islands. It was the flame that lit the path. Faulkner initiated the first political movement, the Demonstration March of 1949, that brought about the first election of the 20th century and restoration of local representation by way of a legislative council now called the House of Assembly, after being abolished for 48 years. The late Theodulf Faulkner could therefore be regarded as the father of modern politics in the BVI. Sadly though, his colleagues Isaac Fonseca and Carlton de Castro were the first elected members, and surprisingly not Theodulf. In 1954, at the close of the second election, after 4 long years in his struggle, Theodulf was elected as the representative to the 5th District and as the first elected official to represent Anegada, which he served through 8 stormy years seeking redress for his people on the remote island. Assigning a physician to the island of Anegada and selecting a nurse to be trained was of paramount importance to Faulkner. Traveling far from his homeland, he gleaned many worthwhile ideas and implemented them in his efforts to create a better life for himself and the people of Anegada. He built the first cistern or water catchment, and his home was made out of cement, which he later designed, and also constructed a tank boat that would transport live fish over long distances to market. Several months before his death, a backhoe, the first on the island, was finally delivered through his persistent efforts by the Canadian government as a gift to Anegada. The first paved roads in Anegada were built out of monies he fought for while representing the island. He erected this fountain to the memory of his friend and colleague, the late Sir Oliver George's Plaza in Roetown, which is still evident today. Theodore Faulkner was a political pioneer with sterling contributions to the British Virgin Islands.
Valerie O. Thomas, affectionately known as Miss Val, was an industrious woman from the Seacoast Bay village who started baking goodies for sale in order to make a livelihood. In addition to making crafts such as dollies, baby booties, hats, in addition to teaching children of the village. As a community leader, Miss Val was the founder of the first library in Seacoast Bay, which she started by purchasing a few books herself. And by the time she was ready to open, she had a few hundred books. She carried this torch for 11 years until there was a government mobile library. Ms. Val was instrumental in the restoration process of the St. Paul's Episcopal Church after the roof was destroyed by hurricane in 1916, and was the founder and leader of the St. Paul's Junior Club, which is still in existence today. She was also the founder of the Mothers Union, known today as the Episcopal Church Women. In 1973, Miss Val became the 9th woman in the territory to be awarded the British Empire Medal by Queen Elizabeth II. Miss Val worked, toiled, and served her community with a can-do attitude. Infused with everything she did, she was a matriarch in many ways, giving untiring service to the church and community that the government saw it fit to dedicate and name the Seacoast Bay Community Center in honor of Mrs. Valerie O. Thomas on May 3, 1998.
Dr. Osborne was the only resident doctor in these islands for some years. He had to do everything, including all the hospital work, hospital surgery, house calls, and delivery of babies. He took care of his work night and day and never failed to answer a call in those days when transportation was very rough. In the 50s and 60s, the servant doctor traveled throughout Tortola by horse, donkey, mule, and by the very few motor vehicles in Tortola, and from Anegada to Jos Van Dyke by rowboat, sailboat, outboard motorboat, and by ferry boat. Whenever duty called, the doc answered. Doc lived a life of absolute devotion to his calling as a physician, carrying on the private practice of medicine until just weeks before he was hospitalized 1 month before his death. His name was not allowed to die with him, as his fellow colleague, Mr. Marvin Blyden, named his pharmaceutical and service building in his honor as Puma Trading Limited.
Nando, known to his family and friends as Nando, is remembered for his contributions to the welfare, growth, and development of the islands. He was elected to the Legislative Council in 1963 and served as the second elected representative for the Roetown area. Having worked in the medical and health field, assisting pharmacists, dentists, lab technicians, and doctors in the operation of the clinic during his short period in a legislative council, he championed the creation of the morgue at the hospital. Prior to that, relatives of the deceased living overseas often miss the opportunity to pay their last respect. The morgue was in many ways the forerunner of the state-of-the-art modern funeral home facilities available today. As a businessman, Nando owned and operated the territory's first laundry and dry cleaning service, Silver's Laundry, which was named after his wife. It is still in operation today and is situated below another famous family enterprise called Scatto's Chicken and Chips.
Willard Wheatley, one of the territory's illustrious sons, started his teaching apprenticeship from the age of 15 years under the wings of the late Harold Roberts. By the tender age of 23, he was appointed headmaster of the Long Look School, then the West End School, before he returned to the East at East End School, where his career as an educator blossomed until his departure from the field in 1967. He threw his hat in the political ring in 1971 as an independent candidate contesting for the 6th District of East End Long Look District. He was successful, and this newly elected member was the first member to go straight to the top as the territory's chief minister, being the second elected chief minister of the British Virgin Islands. When he assumed the chief ministership, the economic activity in the private sector was at a standstill. The public accounts had very large deficits, unemployment was high and rising, and bank closures were up. He saw the need to take control of the territory's finances, that a Ministry of Finance was created, which removed the subject from under the governor and placed it squarely in the hands of the minister. Wheatley became the first Minister of Finance in 1976 and turned the inherited deficit of almost $2 million to a surplus of over $2 million by the end of 1979. The number of electoral districts was increased by 2, from 7 to 9, and correspondingly the number of legislative seats was increased to 9. In the field of teaching, Teachers Week was instituted, as well as the Virgin Islands Affairs. Friendship Day celebrations were instituted to commemorate the kinship and other ties between the BVI and USVI. During his tenure as Minister of Health thereafter, he sought to improve the care of the elderly by opening up the Adina Donovan Home. In recognition of his outstanding service and achievements, he received the MBE for his service in education, and the school at Major Bay was named in his honor as the Willard Wheatley Primary School.
Kenneth Faulkner Sr. was a committed entrepreneur from Anegada who took immense pride in his role of being a provider for his community. He was a man with great craftsmanship that possessed the vision, determination, and strength to make life on Anegada better for all. He didn't wait for development to come, he brought it to Anegada. Kenneth Nepi, the Kid, Captain Hotwater, whom Anegadians also knew as the Freight Boatman, was the first resident on Anegada to outfit his house with electricity and television many years before it became the norm on the island. He had his own little electricity corporation with light poles and all, and everyone came to his house for kerosene and propane. He was a natural captain that sailed and hauled the seas regarding the signs of the tides, moon, and stars, even in dark, stormy weather without any navigational devices to bring food, building material, furniture, fuel, and vehicles to the islands for 5 generations. He was the only means of weekly transport to the islands, transporting people between Anegada, Virgin Gorda, and Tortola. A high financial and personal risk he took as sacrifice for the undeveloped island, together with his tireless work to build a fuel dock that was more accommodating than the government's dock. He built, owned, and operated the island's first gas station, which is still in operation today. The kid was also a fisherman, first-rate boat builder and engineer. He would design anything he needed to make his work and life easier without any blueprints or plan, with every detail formulated in his head. From the tender age of 16, he had an amazing skill of craftsmanship that allowed him to build about 30 boats for himself and other people. The kid's name is forever sealed in Virgin Island history of building famous Tortola sloops like the North Queen 1 and 2, the Carrier 1 and 2, the Andrea, the Blazer, the Joyce L2, which timbers remain on showcase at the H. Laverty Stout Community College. In 2013, the government announced that the official territorial gift is a miniature model of traditional Virgin Island sloop, with the first gift offering given by the Premier to Governor John DeYoung Jr. at the 40th BVI Year's VI celebration was a miniature sloop made by Captain Faulkner.
Raised in Kingarden Bay, the late Ivan Dawson had a keen interest in carpentry and shoemaking, which was an art he mastered and consequently became quite popular as a craft from his village. His involvement in the public life began in 1957, and he served 26 years as an elected legislative council member. In 1966, when the first draft for ministerial form of government was handed down, it was disregarded by the people and the legislature, but it was the humble, cool-headed Ivan Dawson that called the members of council into an informal meeting to discuss and prepare a reasonable constitution for the BVI to take to London. A delegation of 6 went to London, and the team returned with a new constitution which binds the ministerial rule in the territory. Among his several designations in the legislature, he was the first appointed Deputy Chief Minister when the late H. Laverty Stout became the first appointed Chief Minister in 1967. This same year was the start of the political party system when Ivan Dawson, H. Laverty Stout, and Terence B. Lettsome won at the polls under the BVI United Party. When the roads were just footpaths from his home in Ballast Bay, he arranged with a small committee to do some self-help work on the road from Windy Hill to Kingarden Bay, with the late H. Laverty Stout, Rudolph Hodge, and Prince Stout as the foremen. They approached government, and in a short time, the people of Ballast Bay had an access road to Kingarden Bay from the south. Today, the Windy Hill to Kingarden Bay Road is commonly used by motorists. When the telephone system was brought to our shores by Cable and Wireless from Bermuda, that is still grounded at Bruce Bay, this was the district of Mr. Dawson at the time, who had the arduous task to contact every landowner from Bruce Bay to Chalwell to get their permission to bury the cable on their property. It was not easy, but he was successful in his negotiations that paved the way for telephone services after the communications franchise was granted to Cable and Wireless, now Line. Through his efforts, we enjoy telephone services throughout the territory. When there was a problem with several burial places in Kingarden Bay, being on privately held property, it was Ivan Dawson's charm again to negotiate with landowners in Kingarden Bay area to have a large ploy which is now used as a public burial ground. The children from across the hill and Bruce Bay came to Kingarden Bay to school, which was then housed in the Methodist Church, and it was also again through Mr. Ivan Dawson's successful negotiations with landowners for a public primary school to be built in Kingarden Bay. The school was built in 1970 and has since been renamed in his honor as the Ivan Dawson Primary School.
The Virgin Guardian born Joseph Renon O'Neill, a son of the soil, a licensed chemist, dentist, photographer, entrepreneur, and environmentalist. JR, or Jose as he was affectionately called, was a common household name. He was the first licensed BV Islander as a druggist, as they were called in those days, and started a drug store, which was the island's first pharmacy in 1937. The self-made businessman later expanded his business into separate facilities to offer housewares, hardware supplies, building materials to furniture, and electrical appliances by the 1960s. He supplied electricity to citizens in Road Town from his privately owned generating plant when the island was still largely lit by kerosene lamps, predating public supply in the 1940s. One can also recall J.R. O'Neill as the manufacturer of concrete blocks, the first block making plant in the BVI, and also the first stone crushing plant in the BVI for the production of aggregate between the 1950s and 60s. Being the importer and distributor of SO fuels from the 1950s, the BVI saw the first installation of bulk fuel tanks at Bogus Bay in 1963 through his affiliation, and he became heavily involved in the shipping business, including ownership of boats. He collaborated with the government of the territory in the dredging of the harbor, which created what is now Deepwater Port Purcell. Additionally, he constructed the first multi-story commercial office building in 1966, which has become the norm in modern days, and served the community as a founding member of the Rotary Club of Tortola. The other side of J.R. O'Neill was the life of an environmental activist. He was the BVI's first conservationist, and for more than 35 years, he devoted his life to the conservation and protection of the natural and cultural heritage of the British Virgin Islands. He lobbied for the formation of parks and protected areas, and he was instrumental in the development of the system that now encompasses at least 15 protected areas. He was a leading figure in the formation of the National Parks Trust and establishing the BVI's first national park named Mount Sage National Park, also known as Sage Mountain, which he spearheaded its restoration in 1961. He initiated Arbor Day in the territory to stimulate a respect for the importance of reforestation. Arbor Day continues to be an important tradition in the BVI, which has been taken to every school district and resulted in the planting of thousands of trees. J.R. O'Neill, the founding member of the Caribbean Conservation Association, the major conservation organization in the region, has been recognized for his work, and on behalf of the trust, with the naming of a century-old agricultural experiment station, the Botanic Gardens, in his honor in 1988.
Captain Hugo Foy was one of Tortola's early sea masters, who braved the seas of these islands month after month, supplying the needs of the people in the territory. Merchants entrusted thousands of dollars for the purchase of cargo, while ordinary citizens entrusted cattle, ground provision, coal, fruits, straw hats, and bags to him to be sold in St. Thomas, St. Croix, and Puerto Rico. Goods would be purchased and brought back, and strict accounts were kept for return to the territory. Captain Hugo was proven trustworthy, and therefore his cargo business prospered. He was so dedicated to his people that at times he would spend his own money to bring cargo from abroad, and entrusted the people of this territory to repay him upon his return. In 1963, aboard his vessel, the Aimeen, he transported 2 softball teams to St. Croix to participate in the territory's first venture into the international softball arena. Hugo Foy was also the BVI's first male distributor between the islands of St. Thomas and Tortola. He took this task with great pride and took on his responsibilities seriously, so much so that on days when the post office was closed on either island, he would sleep aboard his vessel to guard the mail until the next day, to ensure safe delivery. When Captain Hugo began advancing in age, he retired from the sea and opened up a shop on Fort Hill, and on any given Saturday morning, you would find Hugo, with the help of his brother and sons, preparing cows, goats, and pigs to be sold to the community as beef, mutton, and pork. They were especially skilled at corning pork, a tradition that seems to be dying out, but his famous shop can be recorded as one of the territory's first butcher shops. The children from Bellevue attending school in Road Town or at the Bargus Bay School were common passerbys and grew especially fond of Hugo, as each day he would offer them free drinks from his shop to help aid their thirst before the homeward trod up the hills. Hugo Foy can indeed be remembered as a kind-hearted, generous master of the seas.
Virgin Islands, your qualities can never be denied.